Never trust trucks. Stanley, the silver tank engine, is very helpful. Whenever he sees an engine in trouble, he is more than happy to help. The other engines know that they can count on Stanley. Stanley also gives advice to the engines that are younger than him. The young engines appreciate this. It was the first day of October. Stanley was at the shunting yards. He was shunting trucks of bricks for Hank to take to Great Waterton. The bricks were needed to fix Great Waterton's bridge. Stanley carefully shunted the trucks to the back of Hank. "Your train is all set, Hank," said Stanley. "Have a safe journey." "Thanks, Stanley," replied Hank. "Keep up the good work." Hank blew his whistle and set off to Great Waterton. "I certainly will," said Stanley. Suddenly he heard some voices. "Oh, oh, oh!" Stanley looked around. Then 4 troublesome trucks sped past him. Stanley wondered who bumped the 4 trucks. He soon found out. Charlie pulled alongside. "Hello, Stanley," said Charlie. "Hello, Charlie," said Stanley. "What are you doing here?" "Sir Tom Hat asked me to shunt Norman's train. He's taking some cabbages to the market," said Charlie. Charlie reversed and bumped the trucks hard. Too hard. The trucks bumped into Norman. Luckily the trucks didn't fall apart, but the bump gave Norman a shock. "Oh, grease and oil!" exclaimed Norman. "Is your train, Norman?" said Charlie. Norman didn't reply. He sneered and oiled away. "Charlie," asked Stanley, "do you think you should shunting at that?" "Of course," answered Charlie. "Someone has to keep these trucks in order." And Charlie puffed away, but Stanley was very concerned. Later, Stanley was pulling a passenger train. He arrived at Maythwaite Station. Oliver was there. He could see that Stanley was worried. "Is anything wrong?" asked Oliver. Stanley told Oliver all about Charlie. Now Oliver was concerned. I was like that many years ago. I thought I knew better, but I didn't. So Charlie has to be careful, otherwise he'll be in big trouble." Stanley agreed. Of all the troublesome trucks, Scruffy, Fred, Rickety are the most troublesome. They had been watching Charlie shunt and were very cross. "He thinks he's very clever," fumed Fred. "Bumping off friends like that! Who does he think he is?" snorted Rickety. "Perhaps we should have some fun with him," said Scruffy. Yes, yes, giggled Fred and Rickety. Scruffy whispered his plan. Fred and Rickety laughed and told the others about the plan. Charlie arrived to collect Scruffy and the other trucks for Derek. "Stop, Charlie," said Scruffy. "There's been a change. Our load isn't for Derek to take, it's for Percy to take." Charlie was surprised. "And our load is for Molly to take, not Percy," said Rickety. "And our load is for Derek to take, not Molly," said Fred. So Charlie coupled up to Fred and the other trucks and shunted them to the back of Derek. Then he coupled up to Scruffy and the other trucks and shunted them to the back of Percy. Finally he coupled up to Rickety and the other trucks and shunted them to the back of Molly. Neither Molly, Percy or Derek didn't know that they had the wrong load. Charlie was pleased with himself, but it wouldn't last long. When Derek arrived at the docks, the workmen were surprised to see that his trucks were full of sugar instead of slate. At the chocolate factory, the workers were surprised to see that Molly's trucks were full of chicken feed instead of sugar. And Farmer Cole was cross to see that Percy's trucks were full of slate, not chicken feed. When Charlie was told about this, he was embarrassed. Then Charlie noticed that there were some trucks in the siding laughing at him. Charlie quickly went from embarrassed to cross. "Stop it!" he yelled. "It's not funny!" Stanley reversed and spoke to Charlie. "Remember, Charlie," scolded Stanley, "you can never trust trucks." Charlie didn't say a word. He was thinking how to pay Scruffy, Fred and Rickety back. The next morning the factory controller sent Stanley and Charlie to work at the cement works. Charlie was still in a bad mood. He was very rough with the trucks when he was at the cement works. Fergus was very cross. He didn't like the way how Charlie was shunting the trucks. "Charlie, do it right," fumed Fergus. "Don't be so bossy," Charlie mumbled to himself. Then Charlie noticed Scruffy and Rickety. "This is my chance," said Charlie. Charlie set off towards Rickety and Scruffy. "Charlie, don't!" called Stanley, but it was too late. Charlie bumped Rickety and Scruffy and they crashed through the buffers. Fergus was furious. "Now look what you've done," yelled Fergus. "What do you have to say for yourself?" Charlie stayed silent. "Charlie," asked Stanley, "why don't I finish up and you can have a rest in the siding?" "Good idea," said Fergus. "I want the job completed by a reliable engine." Stanley carefully pulled Rickety and Scruffy back onto the tracks. Rickety and Scruffy glared at Charlie. After Stanley completed the job, he and Charlie had to work at the coaling plant. When they were there, Charlie was rough with the trucks again. Then he saw Fred. "Don't even think about it," scolded Stanley. But Charlie charged at Fred and bumped him hard. Then Oliver arrived to help with the shunting. He could see that Fred was racing towards him. Fred crashed into Oliver. All the coal flew out of Fred and landed all over Oliver. "Cinders and ashes," coughed Oliver. "That was uncalled for." Luckily, Oliver wasn't damaged. Stanley told Charlie that he and Oliver can finish the job. Charlie steamed into the siding and sulked while Fred glared at Charlie. Soon the job was completed and the tank engines chuffed back to Crosby Sheds. That night Stanley was stern.
"I know that you're angry, but you need to stop bumping that truck hard," said Stanley.
"It's my way to teach those trucks a lesson," fumed Charlie.
"That's not a good idea, Charlie," said Stanley. "I just don't want you to get into trouble again," explained Stanley.
Charlie didn't say a word after that. He just fell asleep. The next morning, the Topham Hatt arrived at Crosby Sheds.
"Stanley, you have to collect some new deck chairs and take them to the seaside. And Charlie, you have to collect some tiles and take them to Colesthorpe Station. The station roof needs to be fixed."
"Yes, sir," said the two engines. Stanley looked at Charlie.
"Remember what I said last night?"
"I'll try," mumbled Charlie, and he puffed away. When Charlie arrived, the trucks weren't pleased to see him.
"We want a proper engine,"
said Rickety.
"We want Emily or Arthur,"
said Fred. Charlie ignored them and coupled up to them. "Looks like we'll have to pay Charlie out," Scruffy whispered to Fred. "Yes, pay Charlie out," Fred whispered to Rickety. "Pay Charlie out," Rickety whispered to the others. "Come along," said Charlie. At first Charlie thought that the trucks were under control, but when he reached Gordon's Hill they started their tricks. Charlie was struggling up the hill. He could hear the trucks giggling. "I mustn't be beaten," he said to himself. At last he reached the top. "I've won," he cheered. On, said Scruffy, Fred and Rickety. Charlie was horrified. "Help! I can't stop!" screamed Charlie. The trucks laughed and laughed. Go on, they laughed. Charlie sped past Oliver. "Oh dear, Stanley did try to warn him," Oliver said to himself. Charlie was approaching Shen Valley. Then there was trouble. Charlie derailed at the bend and slid down the hill. Luckily Charlie's crew jumped clear before the crash. He was on his side. He was dirty, his left buffer was bent, and his whistle had broken off. Terence the tractor saw everything. "Goodness!" he exclaimed. "Are you alright?" "I think so," Charlie replied weakly. Terence's driver telephoned for help. When Stanley arrived to help, he gave Charlie a disapproving look. Charlie was ashamed. Oliver arrived with the breakdown crane and Edward arrived to take the trucks away. It took a long time. Once all the trucks were back on the track, Edward took the trucks to Colesthorpe Station. Then the breakdown crane lifted Charlie back onto the tracks. Stanley coupled up to him and took him to the steamworks.
I hope you're proud of yourself.
Stanley scolded. I'm sorry, said Charlie. I was too stubborn to listen.
Well, all is forgiven,
said Stanley. Charlie smiled at his friend. Soon Charlie was as good as new. The mud was cleaned off, his left buffer was straightened, and he had a new whistle. Charlie is much more careful when dealing with trucks, and he promised that he will never trust trucks again.